Hi, everyone. My name is Henry King, and it's really a pleasure to be here with you today, however briefly, before you go into your design sessions. And let me start with a couple of thanks. First of all, thank you to Jan Morrison. We've had an opportunity to work together, starting probably from about 15 years ago, helping to design the STEM strategy for the Gates Foundation. And it's been my great pleasure and privilege to work with Jan and her team at TIES in various different capacities ever since then. So thank you, Jan. And secondly, thank you to all of you. Thank you for the commitment that you've made to our children and to our future generations. And thank you for all of your efforts kind of today and over the next 3 days and going forth from here in really nurturing and shepherding and fostering these communities of practice within the STEM ecosystems. It's very important work, and thank you for doing it. So I only have a few minutes, which I think is awesome because it means that you can jump straight into the design rather than having to listen to me drone on and on. But I wanted to just focus just on four things. I think just like four themes. The first theme is on the ask, which is the very first part of the design process, as I'm sure you know. Then I'll be talking briefly about the imagine part of the process. And then I just want to talk about relationships, relationship strategy, relationship design, and then also scale. So those will be the four things, and I'll cover, of course, each of those very quickly. And so first, with regards to ask, in my mind, the ask phase of design, sometimes also called frame, is probably the most important part of the whole process. And what it allows us to do as designers to really kind of sit in the problem space for a while. A lot of us, myself included, like to think of ourselves as problem solvers. But I think even more important, or just as important as that, is to really understand what the problem is in the first place, to be able to frame it up in the right kind of way, such we really, really understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve before we try solving it. And so there are a number of the ways we can go about that, or at least a kind of a number of actually very straightforward and very simple tools and techniques. And the most important ones are just simply ask questions, ask open questions. Don't ask so many kind of leading questions, if you like, or closed questions, ask open questions. And the second thing is about listening. So listening to really understand and then observing. It may not make as much difference today, but generally speaking, when you are in the ask phase, it's really important to be aware of the context within which things are taking place, in which people are acting and behaving and so on and so forth. So really be aware of the environment and the context within which things are happening, and be listening and asking using a beginner's mindset and not making assumptions about what you're hearing. So I think that's the first thing, really, that's about ask. The second thing then is about imagine. And imagine is, you're going to be using a lot of brainstorming. And brainstorming, of course, is fun. It's an opportunity, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, to really kind of engage in the process, to be able to participate, to be able to add and contribute your own thoughts and your own ideas. And that's fantastic. And I love that. One thing that I would say, though, is that the ideas that you tend to get in brainstorming, the first ideas, or the ones that come from kind of the top of your mind, tend to be ideas that lots of people have. And so the more you work on imagination, the deeper you go, the harder you work at it, the more rich and the more unique and the more differentiated your ideas are likely to become. So you'll find that you'll start with brainstorming, and everyone will have lots of ideas, and you slap sticky notes up onto the board or onto the sheets of paper, whatever you're using, and everyone will get very excited because you're making so much progress. But then slowly but surely you'll slow down, and then you get to just do a trickle. In my mind, that's the point at which you have to really push yourself and push each other as hard as you can to really kind of think about the problem even more deeply than you were previously. And I suspect, I can't prove it, but I suspect that those will be the ideas when you really push hard, and actually it's no longer fun, but it's hard work. Those will be the ideas that will tend to be more differentiated, and I suspect they will be richer for you, and you'll get more mileage out of them. So that's imagine. The third thing is relationships. You'll have heard a lot in the design field about experience design, and experience is important, but in my mind, and I've been thinking about this now for quite a lot, especially recently, experience tends to be one-sided. You tend to be thinking about the experience of the customer, of the user, of the student, of the patient, of whoever, of the consumer. And what we don't tend to think about is the other side of the experience at the same time. Because broadly speaking, experiences are at least two-sided, they're not one-sided. And in particular, experiences are there in order to develop and foster and nurture relationships. That's what we're really trying to do. What we're really trying to do in any situation with any experience is to develop an important relationship. And yet we actually have very, very little work done on the whole idea of relationship strategy and relationship design. So all I would say about this is when you're thinking about experiences, think about both sides or all parties that are involved in a given experience. Think about designing the experience between people. So think about the between, not just the student, not just the teacher, not just the administrator, but think about everyone who's engaged in an experience. Even if it's an online experience, you'll still find that there are people kind of behind the scenes. So think about what that looks like, and think about not just human-centered, but being humans-centered. And I think that's an important kind of step forward in the future of design. The last part is really about scale, and I've seen in some of the documentation that I think the TIES team has produced for this session is about impact and it's about scale. And scale is good, but there's a traditional way of going about this and a much more, kind of, in my mind at least, evolved way about going about this. And you've already organized yourselves in this way. That is to say, you've already organized yourselves into ecosystems. And in my mind, the more contemporary and the more emerging way to scale anything is through an ecosystem and through communities of practices you are doing. So when you're thinking about scaling a particular solution, go back to what you're already doing naturally, which is to be convening as ecosystems. Think about who else you can bring into your ecosystem. Think about how you can be even more inclusive than you already are, how you can make the ecosystem both bigger and richer and more resilient by ensuring that you've got as many different and diverse points of view and contributors and participants in your ecosystem or ecosystem members as you possibly can. So again, you're doing already by nature, by working in ecosystems, you're far ahead of where a lot of organizations and a lot of actually industries are, because a lot of people are still trying to scale up simply within their own organization. That's how they think that they need to control scale. And what you're proving is that that's not the case. And ecosystem is the very best way to scale. And it's not only about scaling, of course, really it's about impact. Impact is more important than scale, at least in my opinion. And so again, continue to do what you're already doing naturally, but when you're thinking about scales, really lean in to your existing ecosystems and think about who else could be involved and how you make the experience and the relationships rich for individual members of your ecosystem as well as for the ecosystem as a whole. So that's it. I think I'm already at about 10 minutes. That was not very much, but hopefully that was useful. It may be useful to you today or the next day. Hopefully it'll be useful in some capacity kind of moving forward. But again, 4 main things just to think about. One is, again, about asking and really asking deeply and really trying to make sure that you understand the problem before moving into solution. And then imagine, really, when you're brainstorming, think deeply and really push yourself beyond it being fun and really kind of do some hard mental work there. The third is about relationships. We always talk about experience design. We didn't always talk about experience design, but we do now, and we have done for at least the last decade. But now we think about the relationships and the purpose of experiences in the first place. And finally, as I said, think about scale and ensure that when you're thinking about scale, you're thinking about scaling through your ecosystems, through your communities of practice. So I hope that's useful. Please feel free to reach out at any time. Jan and her team have all of my contact information. If I can be helpful to you, I'd be delighted to do so. Have a wonderful few days. I'm sure you'll come up with a lot of really great stuff. And thank you again, and thank you to Jan for inviting me. And take care. Bye.